Welcome to the podcast on North American literature hosted by the Research Group Studies in American Literature and Culture from the University of Granada. I am Paula Rodríguez Hidalgo, and today I will be hosting this podcast and I will be interviewing Laura Domenech Lopez. Today's topic will be the use of irony and humor in the depiction of subaltern subjects in Native American literature. Without further ado, let me greet our guest. Hello, Laura. How are you?
Hello, Paula. Thanks for having me today. I'm pretty good. What about you?
I'm well, thanks for coming to our podcast. So, first of all, could you tell me which literary text are you going to focus on for today's topic?
Of course. The works I have worked with in relation to a topic are the interesting narrative of life of Olaudah or Gustavus Vassa the African, writing by himself by Olaudah, and The Exaggeration of Despair by Sherman Alexie.
Amazing. And could you provide a description of said text and the authors for the people in the audience who may not know them?
Precisely. So, the interesting narrative of the life of Olaudah or Gustavus Vassa the African was published in London in 1789 and gained popularity among the American readers in 1791. This success made possible for the book to undergo through several editions. The publication history proves that the book's centrality to the anti-slavery cause. It was one of the first black voices that spoke about inhumanity while having such an impact on the American reader. Equiano was an African slave who was sold to British slavers and then transported to America. In America, he was able to see the ugliest side of the country and the horrors the black slave had to endure. The fact that his owner let him own his freedom is what allowed him to move out of the country and start writing, providing one of the first black voices to literature who could write about slavery from their own perspective, allowing him to use his own experience in his works. It is exactly this personal experience of Equiano what is reflected in the book, as the interesting narrative narrates his own personal life, being a type of autobiography but also adding fictional elements. Then, The Exaggeration of Despair is probably one of the most known poems written by Sherman Alexie in 1996, which portrays anger and grief as a self-defense mechanism. Alexie is a prominent Native American writer of the 21st century, well known for his bold and ironic depiction of the hard reality of reservation life, which can be seen in his poem. The fact that Alexie himself was raised in an American reservation in Washington made possible for him to experience firsthand what he portrays in his work. Topics such as despair, violence, suicide, race and conflict, and poverty are common in his poetry, and The Exaggeration of Despair is one of multiple examples of it. What makes him stand out is his ability to express such tragic reality throughout a humorous point of view.
How interesting. And how would you introduce today's topic in relation to these literary works?
So, it is important to mention that the history of North America, there have been some voices that have been continuously left behind. The voices of so-called the others. These so-called others have found in literature a place where they could express and project themselves, and authors such as Olaudah and Sherman Alexie have been able to provide a rich depiction of the subaltern subject in each of their conditions and eras, having in common the ironic and humoristic technique they both employ. For example, Olaudah uses the vocabulary and ideals of the Enlightenment as well as Puritanism, especially the fact that Puritans believed that they were chosen by God, as well as the enlightened belief that sentiment united all humans no matter what. These both ideas have a strongly ironic nuance and were used as arguments by Equiano in order to prove the humanity and right of freedom of all slaves. The title that Equiano uses brings up attention of the reader by itself, especially the word interesting, which is used strategically with that intention. What he is doing is providing the history of someone that the American reader has never seen before, the history of the other, upon which the reader could project his anxieties and fantasy, and it is exactly what makes his narrative interesting. On the other side, the use of humor is precisely what made Sherman Alexie gain a very important spot on not only in American literature but globally as well. It is this ironic and humoristic tone what characterizes great part of his literary production, and he mainly uses it as a literary device in the depiction of the subaltern subject, which is our main focus today.
And could you tell us what made you choose those two texts, and what makes you analyze a standout from others?
The selection of the interesting narrative of the life of Oloda or Gustavus Vassa, the African, by Oloda and The Exaggeration of Despair by Sherman Alexie for this analysis provided in this study is based on the academic and historical relevance both works present. Each one of them had an important impact on the vision of the subaltern subject on the North American literature of their epochs. In both works, there is a clear use of irony or humor as a literary device in the projection of this subaltern subject, as a way for Native Americans to be able to express their realities, employing said device as a self-defense mechanism. By comparing both works, it can be seen an evolution in the use of the device from a more subtle humor in Oloda to a bolder one in Sherman Alexie, as we will see. Therefore, the originality of this study lies exactly in this comparison, as the juxtaposition of these two specific literary texts for the study of irony and humor as a literary device has not been seen previously. In doing so, this analysis will contribute to the literary studies based on the use of different devices in the projection of the subaltern subject in Native American literature.
Let's start with Equiano. What is your research about the irony and humor that can we see in his book?
In the interesting narrative of the life of Oloda or Gustavo Vassa, the African, the ironic device is extended along the whole book. The main ironic point is the fact that Equiano subverts the white literary canon and the white beliefs and culture in order to project his own reality. Firstly, the reader realizes that what Equiano considers as the others are precisely the Europeans and the white people in general. He describes them as the uncivilized and savage one, exactly what have been the connotations that black people have been receiving until Equiano reversed them. Slavery is one of the main topics of the book, and throughout the first chapter it is revealed that slavery was also known and practiced in Africa. However, the vision that they had about slaves was very different from the one that Europeans had. For example, in Africa, slavery implied moral corruption. Anyone that committed a crime could become a slave. But still, slaves were not seen as the other. Neither was it considered a relationship based on power, but on service. Secondly, there is also an ironic use of the Puritan belief or Christianism and the Enlightenment ideals to advocate for his humanity. However, it is interesting to see as well the irony that the character of Oloda portrays during his evolution throughout the book. As time goes on and he gets to know the whites, he starts to deconstruct his initial images of them. Equiano's vision towards white goes from fear to admiration, even desiring to be white, as well as even though his blackness will not go away. The fact that he now sees white people as superior involves a new perception of the self as inferior. However, said admiration is just a way to enhance all the danger that the white had caused.
What about Alexie?
In The Exaggeration of Despair by Sherman Alexie, There is clearly a bolder and more direct display of dark humor and irony. It was usual for the dominant groups to impose their humor and turn it against the oppressed by ridiculing them. However, Alexei does not hesitate and decides to use this humor as a weapon against marginalization in order to protect not only himself but the subaltern subject in general. By doing so, Alexei is using irony and humor for survival, as well as a way to expose the oppression that they had to endure by the US dominant culture, resulting in a use of said device not only for aesthetic purposes, but from a political and socio-cultural perspective as well. Sherman Alexie understood humor as a way to break down barriers between culture, so it became a key strategy of his. However, unlike Equiano, Alexie still sees himself as the other, as an outsider in his own land. This is translated in the bitter irony and dark humor that characterize the poetry of Sherman. The exaggeration of despair is just another example where humor is used to deal with the frustration and anger that Indians felt due to their discrimination, as well as a tool for empowerment against it. Alexie uses in the poem a self-deprecating humor that even unsettles the reader, as they feel they are laughing at something that they should not laugh. The poetic voice expresses through the poem the different struggles that Indians endure in a sarcastic tone. Apart from dark humor, the exaggeration of despair also portrays the generational trauma that characterized Native Americans. In his poem, Alexie describes experiences that were common for many Indians that live in the same situation. The poetic voice talks about alcoholism, suicide, poverty, sexual assault, etc., which were recurring topics as well as real issues that trouble Indians. Bringing up these real problems offers an historical background of natives as well as a better understanding of how these traumas are a generational issue that had been going on for a while.
Really intriguing. So, as you said, what makes you study original as the fact that these two texts have not been compared before. What would you say that we get from that comparison?
When comparing both texts, it can be seen a clear evolution on the use of irony as a stylistic device in Native American literature. Both authors use humor and irony to challenge oppressive systems and to raise their marginalized voice. However, each author develops the device in different ways. Equiano uses a more subtle irony and almost an inexistent humor that focuses on the hypocrisy of Christian slaveholders, mainly, while Alexie employs a darker and bitter irony and humor that points out more directly the pain of life on Native American reservation. That also works as a coping mechanism against it. Equiano was a pioneer not only of the use of this device, but of native writing in general, which laid the foundation for later writers such as Sherman Alexie. Even though there is no evidence of direct influence of Equiano's narrative in Sherman Alexie, Equiano's irony enabled Alexie to give voice to marginalized communities, while being sarcastic and ironic. Without Equiano's work, it would not be possible for contemporary Native American authors to write and express their reality just like Sherman Alexie does.
Amazing. Well, that has been a great and engaging research. I am very happy that I have been able to listen to you, so thank you very much for sharing us your work.
Thank you for inviting me to the podcast.
It has been a pleasure.